Hello and welcome to episode 97 of Just Keep Writing.
A podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And I'm not Will.
Okay, and this week we are talking about section 1 of Never Say You Can't Survive by Charle Jane Anders, continuing our conversation from last week. I'm super stoked. This week, though, Nick is moderating our little adventure. So what you got for us this week, man?
Ooh. Yeah, I'm so excited to be going over this book. Like, in general, it's such an empowering piece that, like, I just fall in love with every section that I read. But, tonight I kind of want to highlight a couple things from the chapters and stuff like that. But really, like, this is all about character building. This is getting you to start. So I found a lot of good things out of here. A couple things that we're going to kind of go through. I need to preface everything that we say here, and we quote Charle Jane on. Nothing is a hard, set, fast rule. Like, nothing's in a particular order. Nothing says you have to do it this way or anything like that. These are all tools and guidelines to kind of walk you through stuff and be able to kind of get you pointing in the right direction. But if you're reading this with us, like, you'll understand Charle Jane Anders has said multiple times throughout this is not a hard set thing. This is just something you can do, something you can add to your toolbox. So I just want to kind of preface everything with that before we get started here. But I'm going to turn it to you guys first, right? Give me some general thoughts and opinions about this section.
Brent, you start.
Okay, I wasn't sure. All right, so for me, well, I just remember, like, when I was very first reading this. Oh, also, side note, I know this book is also now a Hugo winner after this weekend.
Woo!
So, yeah.
Awesome. This is so good to hear.
Yeah. So, yes, I wanted to throw that out there. All right, so what I like about this section is and I think it kind of is a thread that goes through the whole book in some ways, is that Charle Jane encourages experimentation. Doesn't expect you to just stick to the first thing that you try. She encourages you to try like as many things as it takes to get the story right. Like what I like is that the idea of playing around and exploring is taken very seriously. It's not written off as frivolous. I think, you see, not to get too off track, but you see it happening in like education and stuff, where the idea of play and playtime and all this stuff is diminished and devalued. Whereas I think with Charle Jane, like what you see with this in this section is the idea of like having fun with it and trying new things, and in having fun is how you find the root of what you need to do to create the characters that are going to drive the story. So that's my general thoughts on it.
No, I love it. Marshall, what were your just overall thoughts on this section? High overview.
The part that stood out to me the most, honestly, was the personal story with the teacher that saved that basically that says, I mean, the chapter 3, the teacher who saved my life and made me a writer. Like, a lot of us, I know for me, I have a teacher like that in my life. It was my 7th grade English teacher, and it was like the personal, just the personal part of it, a famous writer giving you advice is one thing, but to write it down and say, look, this was my story. This was something that worked for me. This person saved me. Do you have a story to relate? And how do you push past your stuff and get your, and get your ideas on the page too? So I thought that was really, that stood out to me the most, honestly.
Yeah, well, no, I love all the thoughts. I mean, Charle Jane does a really good job of opening this up here in the beginning, and the getting started section. I love how we have chapter 1 is how to make your own imaginary friends. And one of my favorite lines from this chapter is in the second paragraph there. And it says, there's something both weird and tyrannical about being a person and getting stuck in just one point of view all the time. Everyone has that experience sometimes where you wake up from a vivid dream and for a moment you don't remember where you are and what's been going on. Everything from your skin outward feels like a blank slate, with infinite possibilities until reality comes smashing back down onto you. I like that section right there. Having it fit into creating your own imaginary friends here, because it really is all about creating new characters each time you write, creating new characters for each story that fit the story that you want to tell. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. And, it really is like characters are a blank slate. And so that's where we're going to start tonight. Let's go off of some advice here that Charle Jane gives on creating a new character. So I wrote them down, and there's different sections to each one. I just kind of want to talk about each one as a whole. And then I want to ask you guys a couple questions about this section. And that's kind of going to be the plot line here, or the outline for tonight, right? We're going to talk about a chapter, highlight a couple things, and ask a couple questions here. So Charle Jane's lists these different things that you need to be using or thinking about when creating a character. So be curious. The other one is embracing change. For another one, give your character a strong point of view. Put your character at odds with their world, which is actually one of my favorite ones. Start with a type and then mess them up. Start with an intense situation, then figure out who's in it. Give your protagonist a goal they can never have. Imagine an extreme action and then try to picture the person doing it. The chapter finishes up with a section called We All Contain Multitudes. And I think that's something that's really important here to remember when we're creating these first characters. On this is, they're multifaceted characters, right? We're not one-dimensional, two-dimensional. We want live 3D, 4D characters that we're creating. So I got the list, read the list. You guys have it in your books right now too. So I want to know, of the points made by Charle Jane Anders, which one of those strikes you the most that you would like to use or you do use? Marshall?
I knew you were going to call me first. I put exclamation points next to give your protagonist a goal they can never have. I know for me, like right now in the book I'm working on for our MFA, my main character has a kind of a simple goal. It's kind of like I don't know if you guys have seen Gladiator, like his goal is basically to just have his farm, and tend the land, and be done with all that stuff. And it's like, it's a goal. It's not complicated, but it's super complex. And the fact is, he probably will never have it. You know what I mean? And so, like, the goal that I have for my character is similar, like retire and run a space, a space repair depot, basically, right? But there's something that is going to keep getting keep them off that track. You know what I mean? And that's what. But there's always the goal at the end to try to get there, right? So that stood out to me. I like that advice a lot, or that section a lot.
Brent?
So for me, the one that I think I probably always try to consider the most is think about what your character isn't seeing. Because I think, especially when you're writing bigger worlds, there's going to be so much that your character doesn't know about, or it doesn't, and I think we talk about it all the time, especially like in terms of like social media, when people bring up, oh, well, how come you didn't speak up on this subject, or how come you didn't speak on that? Well, it's impossible to know everything that's going on at all times. So even with the best of intentions. And also, so that's one aspect of how I think about that. But then there's the other aspect of how I think about it when, the blind spots you have for people, or how one person lives in your head differently than they live in someone else's, and how you can see it in you could be reading a story, and this character is very much has like great love for a family member, and anyone else reading the story is like, man, this family member is treacherous. You need to watch out for him. But they don't see it because they care about him. And so I like that, because I think that's, for me at least, I think that's one of the easiest ways to humanize a character is by giving them something that they're oblivious to and that everyone else seems to be able to see.
No, I really like that. And it kind of, for me, I kind of echo what Marshall said. Give your protagonist a goal they can never have. It's kind of messed up to make them want something that I'm never going to give you that. I'm always going to make you struggle to have that. But what I found really fascinating, for me at least, was putting your character at odds with their world. And the reason I found this one a little bit more fascinating and something I need to probably do more is I write highly competent characters all the time. And that's like a default of mine. And so this one actually challenges me is if I'm in a world where you have to be good at, let's say, being an assassin or a spy, and I put them at odds with that is an incompetent character at that point, right? For me. And so I felt that one challenges me a lot when I'm coming up with new characters and things like that, especially main characters. So I really like that one. Next question here, though. What is it mentioned in this list that you guys do use when creating a new character? Brent, we'll start with you.
Like, what isn't used? Because this is a very thorough list. It's hard to say. So, like, because this in particular, it seems to speak a lot about like creating your character in the vacuum a little bit. I don't know. This is hard. It's a very thorough list.
I've got one.
I'll say because for me it's hard because I feel like this is like when I read it, I was like, this is actually a really good checklist. So
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, what am I gonna say?
Yeah,
you got something, Nick? Tell us.
Yeah. I do. So I love taking my main character and making them do something mundane within their world, taking out the trash, making their bed, cleaning their house. Like we did it for the MFA program, starting a fire by hand. How does that look in your world? Right? So it's not just character building, but now you're doing world building with that on top of that. So I like making my characters do the mundane when I get stuck. How do they react when they're stuck in line for 3 hours and they're at the grocery store and they're trying to check out? What do they do during a heat wave with no AC? Brent.
The heat is real. We know, buddy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's a technique I like using. And even it's one of those, like, you can daydream about that. Like, how boring is this? This character has to go and do this, but this is a daily part of life. And what does it look like? And what avenues can that lead you down in when it comes to world building?
So I guess I have one, but I feel like it could slot under a couple of these possibly. But I always like to figure out what they're lying about. Like whether it's lying to themselves or lying to someone else, because we all lie and we all keep secrets. So those are that's one thing I always like to figure out. Like, what are you keeping secret? Why are you keeping it secret? And like, who are you keeping it secret from? Or like what you're lying about. And even if it's lying to yourself, like what lies are you telling? Because I think that is as important as knowing like their fundamentals, I think. To me at least.
No, I really like that. Marshall, do you have one?
Not really. I was kind of thinking like, I don't know. In my head, it's more, and it can probably slide under here somewhere too, but who would they risk their life for? Who would they save? Who is most important? Like with that in mind, fleshing them out and figuring out how they would move through the world in other situations, even mundane situations might change once you know that. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the more emotional side of it.
Yeah, that was something I saw. V. Schwab, I think, was the one who said it too, and I found to be interesting was figure out what line they won't cross. Like, because you always think about like the lines they will cross, but what won't they do to get what they want?
No, I like that.
I really like that one because that's a very superhero, anti-hero thing.
Yeah, like what's the thing that you will not do to get what you want? So I think
that's a big storyline in Batman Dark Knight, right? the Joker wants him to cross that line that he won't cross, and it's an unspoken rule, right? No one actually comes out and says it, but the Joker's like, "I'm going to get you to do the thing that you swear you would never do."
Right, and it's built in. It says as much about the character as what he will do.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. So last question on this one when it comes to character building and things like that. A little bit more deeper in the weeds, and this answer isn't found in the book, so this is coming from us here, and we can reflect in the book if we need to on this one. But when someone says that their main character lacks depth, and that main character doesn't mean anything to them, what kind of advice do you have for that writer in handling their character moving forward?
So this is them. They're saying this about their own character, that they don't think their character has depth.
Yep.
Well, I would ask them. I would ask them some of those questions that I just went through, that we all went through. I think that's the first bit of advice I would give, is just dig deeper. You got to get curious about your. I mean, to Charle Jane's point, you got to get curious about the character. You got to ask them questions as if you were talking to a friend or family member, even deeper than a friend or family member, I think, because there's a level of honesty and just raw truth you can get out of a character that you may never ever be able to get out of a family member or a friend. So, I think you have to be willing to ask. I would say think of the toughest question that you would ask your closest friend, and then start there, because then that's where to build depth.
Yeah, mine's kind of similar. I would do something like have them have a conversation, an uncomfortable conversation, or do a free write around them having a conversation with someone, that would butt up against that conflict and be like, okay, how are they going to move past this conversation? You know what I mean? And see how they react to that conversation. Having that dialogue, even hearing your character speak, is going to be really helpful in that too.
Well, because I think in part because I would say, because it sounds like if someone is saying that I don't think my character has depth, then that means that they're looking for a way to connect to that character. So they may the avenue may be to try to find personal ways to attach yourself to that character. So I would even think of a question that you would be very uncomfortable being asked, and then ask that of that character.
That's good too.
That's a quick way to create depth, because that's depth for you, because that's a question you don't want to deal with. Ask that of the character. Think of the things that and on the flip side, what's a question that you wish someone asked you about your life, or something that I think about the last time you were in a situation where you were pissed off and you wish someone had took the time to maybe ask you a question first before they assumed, how you felt or how they felt. I don't know. Just think I would say to that writer in that situation, it seems like the disconnect is that you aren't feeling that there isn't something about them that feels 3D to you. So think about the hard stuff in your own existence and try to maybe do some copy and paste possibly.
Well, also when you say 3D, what facet is missing? Is there an emotional piece? Is it a empathy? I'm just trying to figure out if you kind of can pin down what your character isn't handling the way you think they should, maybe that's the thing to sit down and have do that dialogue, that back and forth, or some sort of free write around it, and try to figure out, okay, how is my character going to react when they have to deal with this thing that I feel like they're lacking.
Yeah. And also too, if this is a character building stage, that's one thing. If this is drafting, if you're drafting the story, you're feeling that way, it may not be the character. It may be something else structurally. So
that's true
you kind of got to interrogate where you're at in the process and why you're feeling that way too. Because if you're just in character building, then maybe that's what's going on. But it could be something else with draft.
And that could really change too if you're in the revision phase too and something's not working. Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, I asked this question for a specific reason, because I know, through the MFA program, reading, some people have mentioned hey, I don't like this certain character, I don't like the main character because of X, and I think it's a legit question to ask ourselves and be able to answer. I kind of bring it back around to Will, who hasn't been able to jump in yet. grill them, right? What is Will does best on these episodes where we interview people, right? Will knows how to grill and ask questions, and I've come to Will and ask questions about characters, and man, the way he asks questions about things I never even think about, like you really got to look at all aspects of your characters and stuff like that, and just as you said, Brent, interrogate them and things like that to really get to know them and build that 3D model of that character. Well, thanks for answering those questions, guys. We're gonna jump into chapter 2 now, and I think this is just a good rah, let's go kind of cheer right here. But
Why?
it is about
Because this is the
imposter.
conversation that we're always talking about, imposter syndrome. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yes, this is the one where it's like, to me, I was like, oh yeah, I know what this is. I know what it feels like. I never know how to get around it, but it seems like no one else does either, other than talking to yourself. But I mean, like Charle Jane lists 4 things about imposter syndrome. There is no magic wand. You are a writer when you write words. Again, there is no magic wand. You are a writer when you write words. I think this is one of the biggest things that stood out to me in chapter 2 was this one alone, because of the experiences that Charle Jane had when someone didn't consider her a writer because she didn't have professional hair. Someone didn't consider her a writer because her work was better than they expected of her. And to me, like, we've all been there. We've all seen it happen to other people. There are gatekeepers that are going to be there, but they're wrong. And this is what the first one kind of tells me is like, no, if you're writing words, you're a writer, plain and simple. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, you're doing the thing. You don't need permission from other people to be that. The other thing she talks about with imposter syndrome, it lasts forever. It's something we always deal with. It's something that we have to get through. She talks about the rules, and she says, screw the rules. There are no hard set fast rules, right? Which is why I really love this book. And the other big one here, so 1 and 4 are the big ones from here, is find people who support you. And I think that speaks the biggest truth when it comes to imposter syndrome is really finding people who support you and your community in which you can feel supported and things like that. Hint, wink, wink. If you haven't joined our Discord channel, you can find it in the show notes. Join our link. Get a buddy. Let's do this. Any thoughts from chapter 2?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's forever. You're never going to get rid of it. There's no amount of, unfortunately, there's no amount of success where you'll ever magically get to wave it away. Now, that's not to say it's going to be all doom and gloom and you won't ever be feeling yourself and there won't be days where you feel like the shit, because you will have those days too. And when those days come, embrace them, because they're just, they're just as valid as the days when you're fighting off the imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is forever. It's never, ever going to go away. And I'm telling you now, I can see this fucking Hugo right here in the corner, and it doesn't, and it didn't wave away imposter syndrome. It didn't make it disappear. It didn't make it like, in fact, if anything, it amplified it. Like that's the weird, like, inverse equation sometimes that happens with success. Sometimes the more success you find, the more of an imposter you feel like, because it's almost like, wait, did they mean to get that shit to me? No, that was an accident. That had to be a flaw. That was a fluke. That couldn't have been the real thing. I don't deserve this shit. And yeah, it happens. Or even now, like, people actually want to read this book that I'm working on. Oh shit! Like they must be mistaken. This can't be true. And it's never ever goes away. And I would love to lie to you and say that success somehow makes it go away, but it doesn't. All you have to do, the only thing I would say, and I think Charle Jane speaks to this, is that you just got to show up, and you just got to keep showing up. And that's really all there is to it. There's going to be parts that suck. You're going to deal with gatekeeping bullshit, especially if you have any kind of marginalization that you can tag on to who you are. Especially, unfortunately, in science fiction, you'll in fantasy, you'll run into that in this field. But my one, I think of this. Cherie Renee Thomas had this thread on Twitter the other day that was talking about this somewhat, and for a lot of us, our first gatekeeper is ourselves. And if
Ain't that the
you,
truth?
yeah, we gatekeep ourselves before anybody else does. And I would say is if you're wondering if you belong, then I guarantee you belong. And there's just read through the horror stories of what some of these agents go through and some of the responses they get in their inbox from people who have zero lack of confidence that this story should have been picked up and it should have been published in a million different bookstores.
Yeah, no, what stood out to me, honestly, the most is the screw the rules section, mostly because I've been to countless conferences, you take classes, you have teachers telling you, that honestly, the thing that really stuck with me is the prologue thing, because I've had workshops where people were like, well, you have a prologue and you're not supposed to do prologues anymore. It's like, why can't I do a prologue if I want to do a prologue? You know what I mean? Like, who's saying? And there's people doing more second person these days and stuff like that. So for me, I just feel like if you want to do it, pull it off. You know what I mean? And don't let, and like you guys were saying, don't let yourself be the first gatekeeper too on that. No, the screw the rules section was perfect. I love it. You just need to do what you do and pull it off, and it'll work, because that's what you need to produce, right?
Yeah, 100%. I love screw the rules section because it is true. There's always gatekeepers. There's always someone there to tell you that you can't do that or you have to do it a certain way. And Charle Jane even calls herself out that if you ever hear her saying that, she says, like, don't tell me that I'm being like that, because sometimes it does come out certain ways. Like, we all have our own biases, but I like how Charle Jane is openly invited, like, hey, call me out if I'm doing this, because that's going against what I'm preaching. And she doesn't want to be like that. Really, really like this section. I think it's an important one. If you have this book, please, 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 please read this section. I enjoy chapters 3 and 4, but I definitely want to get to chapter 5, which is going to take the rest of the episode here. Chapter 3 is about the hero teacher. So, Marshall, I know as a teacher yourself, I'd love for you to kind of give us some insight on this, on from a professional standpoint, how does that feel when you know that someone had a teacher be their hero for them to really help them get through a hard time and giving them the permission they needed to be themselves and do what they wanted?
Yeah, I know. Being on both sides of it, it's important. I had a teacher in my life that encouraged me to write, and that was kind of the reason that I started doing this. But at the same time, there's something to be said when a student that I've had reaches back, and I taught English forever, and I have students reach back and be like, I hated that you made me read this, or I hated that you made me watch this, but now I'm a huge fan of X, Y, and Z, and now I'm writing. Now I want to be a teacher. Those are the kind of things that really, man, it feels good. It feels like, you have 100 students a year, and if 3 or 4 of them reach back 5-6 years later and be like, I'm sorry I was an ass a lot of that year, but I really look back fondly on our time together, and I really appreciate you. Now I want to be a teacher. That's a huge thing. It makes it feel like it's, you're actually making a difference. You know what I mean? We spin our wheels at work every day, regardless of what we're doing. But when we make that impact, make that sale, impact that person's life in some way, it's a big deal. So it feels good. And it's important to know that even though it may not happen right away, it might happen 5, 6, 7 years later, but somebody might reach out to you and say thank you. And it means a lot. I've still to this day haven't been able to find my 7th grade teacher and reach out to him and tell him how much it meant to me that he liked my stupid short story I wrote about some knight or something. You know what I mean? It was just something. It was my first little foray into fantasy, and he encouraged me, and that was a big deal. So.
No, I really like that. I appreciate you sharing your story there. Definitely go and read chapter 3. It's a really, really good one. I loved I really like chapter 2 a lot, or chapter 4 a lot as well. This is all about finding the joy in making a mess. I love the chapter title. The full chapter title here, let me actually read that for you here. You know, embrace uncertainty, the joy of making a giant mess. And then the opening line is, I can still remember the last time I felt like a total confused noob as a writer. It was a couple weeks ago. Right? So, Brent,
God, that's so reassuring to hear published authors say
this
stuff
book
like
came
that.
out in 2021. She wrote it during 2020, so you did the math there, and this book just won a Hugo, and she admits full in here she felt like a noob a few weeks ago, like while writing this. So chapter 4 is a really, really important one, you know, embracing the mess and the chaos of it, the mental gymnastics. But there's a section in here that I'm encouraging everyone to read, and it's highlighted in gray. What do you do when your story wanders off course?
Oh, I like that, yeah.
So this is a really good section, and it's in here, and I want to cover a couple things real quick. And it opens as this: you set out to write a story about a man who is in love with his own clone, but somewhere along the way, you ended up writing dozens of pages about the bakery where the clone buys scones. Soon you have a story about a bakery where the man and his clone are minor characters, and is this a problem? So it kind of dives into this issue of diagnosing what is a problem, what is broken, and things like that for you. So give that a read offline here, and come back to the Discord and tell us about it, because there's a lot of good things in that little subsection there. But I really want to get to chapter 5. Everything is broken. What should I write about? When Charle Jane says everything is broken, it's not about the writing. It's about the world that we live in. It's about our reality, our day-to-day choices and things like that. And I think this is where Charle Jane really hits a home run in this section for me. You know, because if you look back on your own life, you can see different points where you felt like things were broken in the world. Charle Jane highlights a couple of them in here, you know, dating back to 2001, you know, struggling with the USA Patriot Act, and things like that. And I have, like, you know, a couple of things that I pulled out of the section that I want to mention again here. That Charlie talks about: right to survive, or write whatever you need to survive, is one of the first big sections here. I'm going to read a little bit of this for you guys here. When the whole world is on fire and people you love are at risk, what should you write about? Whatever you feel able to write, whatever will make you feel like you can keep living and fighting. Write the thing you're ready and excited to write, not the thing that you feel that the moment calls for, or the story that you think will fix every broken thing in the world. Your job is to survive, and maybe to help others to survive. That's it. That's more than plenty. So kind of want to pass it to you guys on this one a little bit. And I know we've talked about it before a little bit in the introduction here, but world's broken. How do you survive through writing? Open edit here. We kind of touched on it on the introduction one, so I know, like, it may be a recap, or we can dive a little deeper.
Well, and she explains it so well.
Yeah.
I don't know what really to say beyond what she said. Because what she said pretty much is the root of it. You gotta write what so don't try to write what the moment calls for. And I think what Charlie is speaking to in that aspect, maybe I can just expound on that a little bit, is I think the pressure that a lot of, I know this is something that especially, like, I think a lot of speculative writers of color have to deal with, in terms of, like, trying to figure out, like, writing about the fantastical things we write about, because often within our communities, the speculative fiction writing isn't seen as the serious, the important writing, the writing that's, doing the work. I'm not out here being Toni Morrison. I'm not out here being, despite the fact Toni Morrison was very speculative, but that's another subject. Anyway, I'm not out here being, James Baldwin. So it's like, you feel sometimes it's like, damn, it's like this the best use of my talents in respect to like my people's journey or place in the world, or whatever. So, and I think what she was speaking to is that pressure that, you sometimes feel to write a serious, important, weighty work, when honestly, that's not what's going to make you a better writer, because you're not writing to your heart. You have to write to your heart. And I think that's what she's saying. Like, if you're going to, I think what she's saying is rising to the moment isn't like trying to be lofty. Rising to the moment is being true to yourself despite everything else going on around you.
Yeah. And I do, not to say I disagree, but I do feel like if you feel like you need to write something in response to another thing, I definitely think that's okay. As long as we're not looking to like publish, and you just need to write out your emotions. Because to me, those are two different things. Writing to your emotions and working through something, and then writing to publish to fix something. Those are two different things, in my opinion there.
Yeah, and I think, and I think I agree with you. And I think I guess the big difference is are you doing it because you think you should, or are you doing it because you're actually being driven to? Like, if in that moment you just have a flash of anger and you're like, fuck this, and I want to write about this, like, go for it. But if it's like you feel like, I'd really rather write this story about Tinkerbell, but this news item is right here in my face, and maybe I should write about it, then I think you need to evaluate why you're doing it.
And so
and I've had that.
I was
going to
ask you a separate question, because you have had a piece that's been published that your world was broken at the time, and you wrote something so profound, and it is on our blog page on our website if you guys want to go back and revisit it. But kind of like, for you, that was a survival technique, more or less. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit on your process there, and like how that helped you through that time?
Yeah, because I was pissed off, and I didn't think a random blog post would be published worthy. And I don't know if it even mattered whether it was published or not, but it had to be written for me to stay sane in that moment, because I was upset about all the bullshit in the world. I mean, it was a response to George Floyd, and that was just one of those things that I was sick and tired of all this shit. And so I wrote it. But my process was angry rant, people reading angry rant, a friend of mine working for NBC saying, hey, do you think if you polish this angry rant, you'd want to put it on NBC? And I was like, yeah, maybe, sure. But like, I didn't, and like you were saying, Nick, it's like, not like I think that piece didn't change the world in any way, shape, or form, but it changed my world, and it helped me, and it helped the people around me understand me. And like I was telling you, there were so many people that came out of the woodworks trying to talk to me about that piece. I said, I don't want to talk to you. Read it. I don't want to process that. Like, you can read it, and and that's where I'm at. But on a different note, though, what I think is really interesting, and just to kind of expand upon what Brent was saying as far as Charle Jane, is on page 48. She says, except that you might need to be okay with changing gears on the regular, because the thing you felt like working on today may not be the same thing that feels good tomorrow. I've only written one other thing similar to that since then, and it's been how many years? 3, right? Right now, I'm writing Black people flying spaceships in space, and I'm having fun with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I need to write. And I think changing gears and being able to do that and shift between angry and angry processing, and just, I want to write a fucking story that is cool.
Yeah.
That's, you know what I mean? So
yeah. And so you kind of segue into the next section here as well, on the next two here. with that. And I want to recognize too, like Charle Jane said it right there. You write to survive and maybe help others survive along the way, right? And I wholeheartedly feel like that's what that piece was for you, Marshall. And I know it helped others.
Yeah.
It helped me understand more as like a cis white man. Like I don't experience that, but it helped me understand more of what you do and what you and Brent go through, right? So I appreciate that blog post that you didn't think was worthy. I don't think it was awesome. So the next section I actually found really interesting. I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on it. You can't escape writing politics, so just write them. I found that super interesting because I actually tend not to try to write politics, like, well, current politics. Yet it bleeds through my work. So I want to open this one up to discussion. What are your guys' thoughts about this section here about writing to politics or not writing to politics, or if you don't have a choice, it's going to happen no matter what because of how people would interpret it?
Yeah. There's a quote. I can't remember who said it. I wish I could, but it's always stuck with me. And the quote is, "The personal is always political." And basically the whole idea of it is that who you are as a person, every choice you make as a person, everything you do as a person has politics behind it, has either an acknowledgement or, it all has politics behind it. Like, but everything from the car you choose to drive to, the things you choose to do at work, or the way you interact with your coworkers, or how you feel about, a city in another country, all of that, whatever. All of it is, every choice you make is a political choice, and there's no such thing. Even the idea of trying to avoid politics is still a political choice.
Isn't that the craziest thing, though?
Yeah. Being apathetically trying to create political apathy is still politics.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think about it this way too. Let's say you're in a fantasy setting and you're an assassin and you don't agree with your order given to you, or you don't agree with the king not being able to feed the poor. That's politics right there, right?
Political choice.
Political. Which is like the craziest thing to think about, because it's like, no, I'm not writing about Republicans and Trump and like Democrats and like, I don't write that. I write that. Yeah. I write that. Like, let's be honest. Like, it's there. It's just it's subconscious.
Well, yeah. The thing is, you can't help but write to the moment, right? Or like, I think about this one character from X-Men. So there was this from the old animated series where there was the Emperor Dakin of the Shi'ar Empire, who was clearly unhinged, clearly a person who had no business on the throne. And Gladiator's like, well, I know he's fucked up, but my service is to the throne no matter who sits on it. Well, in his mind, he's probably thinking, I have no choice in this matter. I'm simply just doing as as my duty calls. And it's like, no, you very much made a choice. You chose to support a madman, and you used duty as a screen to to not deal with having to make a choice. So I always think of like that particular moment when people talk about, oh, well, I'm just, I'm not really political. It's like, yeah, you're political. You just don't want to have to actually take a stance.
We actually saw this in Black Panther, right? I'm loyal to the throne. I'm loyal to Wakanda. You know what I mean? Like, that was a very defining moment in that story, and I love that movie. Absolutely love it. Thank you guys for answering those questions. So I'm gonna move on to the last section here, and I think this one's the fun section for me, and it's a fun one to end on, right? So it's all about dreams, right? Your daydreams could change the world is the name of this section, right? So let's talk about daydreams. Like, Brent, Marshall, obviously you guys are Black writers, and we've heard multiple times through guests, through you guys, through Just Keep Writing About Black. Why can't I just be a Black writer and write about dragons? So I want to know, what is it you want to write about where there's no pressure, where it's just something fun for you? And like, what do you daydream about, like, during the day that you want to write that you may or may not have permission to write yet from yourself?
I don't know actually, because I don't think what I'm working on. I don't feel like I have. I don't feel like I have the barriers that I used to have about like what I would and wouldn't let myself write. Now I know the things that I avoided writing, but I never felt like it was a lack of permission. It was more just like, I don't think I'm ready to touch that yet personally. But I think I moved past the point of feeling like I need permission to write something.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Brent. I feel like at this point, if I'm writing something, it's because I want to write it and I just need to write it, and that's just what's gonna happen. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there are certain things, like I was saying earlier, I don't think there are some stories that I want to tell that I probably won't tell right now, but at some point I plan to. You know what I mean? But I daydream all the time. I mean, I have a really weird imagination. My dreams are all fucked up, you know? So like at some point, some of that stuff's gonna come out the page.
Right.
You know? So yeah, man, I'm excited to just experiment with whatever I can come up with, honestly. So
No, I love it. I love this section. It's for me, it was a really good section, kind of eye opening, and kind of helped me through. Oh, this novelette, Marshall, you and I just have to write for school.
oh man,
And yeah, so it really helped me get through
that
that.
consumed me.
Oh my gosh, no, you're not even lying. But like I said, this book really helps. It's really empowering. I love this section. Retaking a look at characters, retaking a look at yourself with imposter syndrome, and really like understanding like that's the thing that we need to work through. Find a good support group out there. Again, our Discord channel was posted in the show notes. Jump in if you already haven't. But I love this last chapter. Your daydreams could change the world.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.